Hi students! So in this edition of our Neurons on Fire series, we're going to look at a very important skill set called note-taking. So before we actually get into talking about note-taking as a skill set, I want you guys to transport yourself back to when you first remember school, like getting ready and going to school. Maybe it was pre-kindergarten, maybe it was kindergarten, maybe it was elementary school, maybe you didn't kind of wake up until middle school or high school, but in any case, I want you to think about those early experiences when you first started school and kind of brainstorm or tell yourself out loud, what is it that you remember about that time period? And I bet after you get past the being nervous about maybe going back to school or missing summer or whatever, I think one of the first things that we tend to think about is going back to school and going back to school shopping. And we would go and we would get all our supplies that we needed to be ready for the classroom. Okay, now when we were kids, I think that was kind of an exciting time, right? Unless your parents were strapped for cash at the time to get us the things that we needed, it was a pretty exciting time because we got these colorful pens and paper and notebooks and, stuff to keep everything in. And I want you to do that again as a college student. I know you've been going to school forever and, now it's not cool anymore, but it is cool. It is definitely cool. So part of the process of note taking is you have to, of course, have your supplies and also just in general with everything you do have a positive attitude or a positive mindset about the experience of note taking. And so part of that is creating this atmosphere that makes you feel comfortable and happy when you start to take notes or when you get out your notes to review them. So I really recommend that you go back to school shopping and you find that favorite pen. Oh my gosh, guys, when I hold pens and I take notes, there's a certain feeling that feels, how you grip and how the pen feels, whether you like a fine point or a thick point, right? The way that the ink comes out of the pen, it's very satisfying when you find the right pen, right? When it comes to the actual notebook that you have or the paper that you're taking notes in, or if you use a laptop or a computer. But in this case, I love having a notebook, something that inspires me when I open it. So I like mandalas, right? And so on this one, it puts me in a very zen state before I take notes. Just seeing that and the color and the black, white, and pink, it just really makes me feel good. And then, of course, for a lot of my classes, I like keeping everything organized so you can shuffle your notes and any handouts that you get and so forth. And so here I have a binder on the screen that just says good vibes only. And I don't know, just when I see these materials, I'm put in a positive state. I've got my materials. When I'm using them, I feel creative. I feel in control. I feel happy. And that's a large part of it. So don't poo-poo your supplies. Go get your favorite things and make it joyful when you take notes or when you study your notes. Let's talk now about the importance of note taking. So a large part of your college experience involves taking notes. You're either taking notes of the readings that you have, the textbooks readings, websites, articles, journals, right? You're either taking notes of that and you are attending classes where you're having lectures and discussions and debates, you're watching films, and all of this kind of stuff. You have to somehow find a way to capture that information, to collect that information so you have it available so you can study later. So the idea a lot of times is that students attend class and they may even in the moment understand what's going on in the classroom. They're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. And they don't take notes. And the thing is, you're just relying on your short-term memory, which isn't going to stay with you for very long. How are you going to go about collecting and capturing that information so you can actually move it from the short-term memory to the long-term memory? So it's actually part of deep learning, which is what we want, of course, in college, but just in life, if we learn something, we want it to stay with us. The statistic on this is that we lose about 75% of what we learn within 24 hours. And that's assuming that we're learning it. So what if you're in a class and you don't understand things and you're just listening, but you're not capturing it? So we pretty much don't retain that at all because we don't even understand it. But of the things that we actually are learning and understanding, we lose about 75% of it. So note taking is so important because we've got to actually capture that information. Now, when we take notes of the textbook, that's a certain process, and we take notes of a lecture or a discussion, it's pretty much the same thing, but there are a few added challenges of being in a classroom environment. And one of those challenges, of course, is it's the constant nature of the note taking. Like the student doesn't have any control over the speed at which the presenter is presenting the information, or which like if a film is on, the film is going on, you can't really stop it. The instructor's in control of that. Or if there's a discussion or a debate, you can't just, stop it. Like when you're reading, of course, you can stop reading and then you summarize and write down what you need to write down. And another difference or another challenge is that your instructors themselves may provide you with challenges. And we all can give a huge list of challenges. Some instructors have accents. Some instructors are unfortunately unorganized. The speed, right? Some go super fast. Some are very monotone. So that adds another dimension, which might make note-taking a little bit more challenging. So let's take in the big picture of note-taking. We've already looked at why we should take notes, the idea that we need to capture, collect the information. But what should we be taking notes of? What should we be writing? And how should we write that information? Okay, so now I'd like to address those two questions, what and how. And as far as what you should be taking notes of, just like when you're reading a textbook or an article or a journal or a website, you need to record the key concepts, the main ideas, and the supporting details. So you're always looking for those pieces of information. Now, a lot of students think that they're supposed to write a transcript of everything that's being discussed. No, you're not supposed to write it word for word. You're really supposed to be being an active listener and scanning the information and really asking yourself, okay, well, what's the main idea of what they're talking about? What's an example of this? What's an elaboration? What's an experiment? And you list those things and then you collect the information. As far as the how, there are a lot of different note-taking systems out there, but they can kind of be divided into two groups. There's what's called the linear note-taking systems, and then there are the graphic note-taking systems. And there are all sorts of styles out there. So you kind of have to look and experiment and try. And even once you find one, you might tailor it a little bit to your needs and your learning styles. So you just need to find one that works and use it. Okay, so I just want to briefly talk about the two main ones. So there's the linear note-taking style, right? And this style is basically keeping your notes in a line, and it works really well for when the lecture or whatever it is you're taking notes of is very well organized, and also if it's kind of linear in thought and in time. So basically what you do is you write the key concept right at the top of the page, and then you're going to have the main idea, and the main idea you're going to put at the leftmost part of your page with Roman numerals, and then you indent in a little bit with the secondary ideas, and then you use capital letters like A, B, C, D. And then for the next area, right, so the major details, the major supporting details, you're going to indent in again, so you're getting closer and closer to the right hand side of your page, and you number those 1, 2, 3, 4 as you're going down the list, and then you indent yet again closer to the right hand side of your page with the minor supporting details, and you use lowercase letters like A, B, C, D. So that's basically an outline, right? And we've all done outlines in high school. You can go to the table of contents and things like that. They're usually in an outline. Now, a concept map is a graphic. It's a picture. It's a visual. So if you happen to be a visual learner, usually these work really well for you. And the placement of where you're putting the information, right, tells you things. It tells you how important the information is and the relationships between different kinds of information. So in this case, you put the key concept in the middle of the page. You might circle it, for example, or underline it. And then the main ideas, instead of being, tabbed in and, using Roman numerals and capital letters and so forth, here you put the main idea near the key concept, and again you circle it or underline it, and then you put lines connecting to the main idea. Then when you have your secondary ideas, right, they're close to the main ideas, right, and then you draw lines connecting them to those main ideas. And then you have the major supporting details, and they're close to the secondary ideas, right, again circled and underlined, and then connecting lines. And then finally you have the minor supporting details, which are near the major supporting details, and again connected in with lines. So it's this wonderful wonderful visual tool, and it's wonderful for lectures where there's a focus on going from idea to idea, and also anytime there is a lecture or a class discussion which kind of bounces around. That's when you should use the concept map. The question I have for you on this slide is, when should you work on your note-taking skills? And a lot of students say, well, you work on your note-taking skills when you're taking the notes, right? Clearly. The answer actually is you should work on it during 3 different time periods. You should work on your note-taking skills before you even take the notes, obviously while you're taking the notes, and long after you've completed the notes. It's the same idea as when we talked about reading strategies. When should you work on your reading? Not just when you're reading, but you can do things before and after, right? And this is really going to solidify the learning process and result in deep learning. Your textbook actually goes into the 3 different time periods, and it gives you strategies, things that you can actually do and implement, and try them out. Read over the list, see which one or ones might work for you. You might already be doing some of them. Try something new, see if it works for you. But I just want to highlight a couple of the ones that I actually use. First of all, in the before process, one of the things your book suggests is to complete any reading or homework before you actually go into the location where you're going to be taking the notes. And we're kind of assuming here like a lecture or discussion environment. I love doing this because it's already grounding you. You're already becoming familiar with the information, let's say out of a textbook. So when it's time to take notes of the lecture, you already recognize something. You're already making connections to things that you already know. It's kind of like prior learning or something at least that you saw. You recognize a definition, you recognize a name. You also know whether the instructor is completely going off on their own on new information, or they're repeating or sharing or elaborating on information that you've already read. So it just grounds you, it provides a context, it provides a launching point. It just really makes the note-taking process a lot easier. As far as during, not only as a former student, but as an instructor, this is a big one. And it's that whoever's presenting, or if there's a discussion going on and there's a moderator or something, the verbal cues that are given from the presenter, from the professor, are really important, because a lot of times they're literally telling you, hey, this is the main idea, this is the key concept, or this is a supporting fact of the main idea, or this is an example. And they're telling you. And not only do they tell you with certain words, and again, you can look in your textbook for those kind of primary key words or sentences that we say, but they also tend to repeat it. If an instructor is repeating a concept, that's usually one of those main ideas, supporting facts, or examples. And they also will use hand gestures. So I know when I lecture, if I'm like, this is the main idea, you can even hear me doing it right now, maybe in the background, right? I'll take my one hand and I'll kind of hit it on the other hand, or we'll point really strongly, or we'll do something. So there's usually some kind of emotionality, I think, sometimes associated with some of these main ideas, supporting facts and examples, right? So look for the verbal cues, look for even the visual cues in your instructors presenting. And again, look at the list in the textbook. Lastly, as far as after, there's a time period to this, and within 24 hours, you should get out those notes that you took in that class, and you should polish them, okay? What that means is, you can fill in the blanks of things that you didn't know, or maybe you didn't complete a definition, or maybe you turn your notes into something called Cornell, and you'll see a little vignette in your book about Cornell, but you can actually ask guiding questions that help organize your thoughts. You might put in examples that you've come up with in the margins. Maybe even you take your notes, maybe you did them more of an outline and you transform it into the visual form, the graphic, the content map, right? Maybe you make it more colorful. You just work on your notes to make them more organized for you. In some cases, students may even take their handwritten notes and they may then use the computer and generate something that's a little bit more formal for them. And in doing all of this, obviously, you are consistently practicing with the information. Now, my last point on this slide is that your textbook does make a notation about recording, like tape recording, a course lecture. And if you are diligent and you keep up with those recordings, it can be a not bad strategy. But I've noticed so many students will take like a recorded class, and then they have all these lectures recorded, but they never actually transcribe the information and try to collect the information, and they just get behind. And it turns into a horrible waste of time, and they never really have captured or learned the information. So don't get into that bad habit. If you do record a lecture, As soon as you get home, start working on it, start processing it. So, happy note taking skills. Make it a joyful process. It really is about, it's kind of like a puzzle about figuring out what's the main idea, the supporting fact, and the example. And you're really practicing your active listening skills. And then you record, and then, of course, you generate your own study guides and reviews by doing this. So, happy note taking.